it's probably very obvious if someone can look in their manuscript and see someone saying, "She just had a feeling," or "I just knew he was the one," or whatever. That's pretty obvious, but in the spirit of first identifying if this is going on, are there any subtle clues that a writer can look for in their own work that tells them that they're falling back on this magical knowing?
It's hard to see it in your own work, like, it's hard to see so much in our own work, for the reason I said is that we're filling in the blanks because we know the story so well. So you kinda have to get a little bit forensic about it and deliberate. Of course, one of the best ways to see things is by having outside eyes, whether that's a beta reader or your critique partners, an editor, a book coach, whoever you happen to have at your disposal, because they will be able to give you that objective feedback. But you also can do a lot of that on your own by kind of dissecting the story, which is something I advise a lot in my editing, teaching, and working with authors. Ask yourself questions and keep digging deeper. So you can see if you can, first of all, one thing I'll suggest to authors is in general, can you, and we're talking about a lot of different elements here, sort of big overarching magical knowings, and then individual instances of it also. So I'm going to try to give you blanket advice here that will apply in different ways. But for example, with the overarching issue, do we understand what your character, what's driving them? Why this, for example, I used the losing a job or a marriage. Why does this matter to them? Have you put that on the page? So first, you might write that down. What is it that your character wants? What drives them? What's making them want this thing? Make sure you can articulate that. And then ask yourself, how would a reader know that? Where do you think you've shown that on the page? And you can highlight it, you can go just pinpoint it, jot it down, make sure it's there. Then another thing I often advise is to dig a little bit deeper than you might. Like one thing authors will do is say, okay, my character is, let's say, an architect, and her dream is to build eco-conscious buildings that are not like anything else anybody has ever built before and make a name for herself as a female architect. So we think we know what the goals and motivations are, but there's a lot beneath that that is the true, I usually call it, rather than motivation, think of it as what's driving your character because it underlies motivation. So we need that, and we also need, that's their external goal. What's the internal goal for that? So break it down any way that applies to your story. But what we want to know is why, sort of like the objective values I was talking about with divorce or whatever the issue is. Why does that specifically matter to this character? It's not a given that everybody in a particular field wants to make a huge name for themselves or be a trailblazer. Why does she want to do that? What nerve is that hitting on in her? Has she always felt like she has something to prove? Does she feel like as a woman she has something to prove? Is it that she was told as a child by one of her parents that she wasn't good enough and that's what's driving her? And then what's beneath that as far as what's driving her? What need is your character trying to fill? I call it the longing or the lack, or the longing and the lack. What is it they desperately want and why? What hole in them are they trying to fill? If you can articulate all of that, then you can start going through your story. And you almost have to do it as a separate editing pass because you have to divorce yourself from the creative side that's taking in the story, that's assessing it as a whole. And you have to really look at it with an editorial eye where you are much more granularly and forensically breaking down the piece parts of it as I would, for example, if I'm working with an author, I would analyze every single line and look for what have you conveyed in that line? How in this scene do I understand what your character wants? How do I understand what's pushing them for it? How do I understand if they have this realization here? How do I know where are the stepping stones that led me to see how they got to that point, even if the character doesn't see it? A lot of times the way to pave this in is, without spoon feeding the reader, is to understand your character may not know it. The same way that in life we don't always know why we're doing what we do. But somewhere inside of us is a we are products of every experience we've had, every relationship we've had, everything we've ever done, everything we've ever been exposed to, and all of that is swirling around in us that is the real reason behind whatever we seem to suddenly do. And we've got to, with our characters, figure out how to tap into those things and hint at them, lay the groundwork for them enough that your reader can infer why your character might be acting this way so they don't seem to be suddenly doing unmotivated things that make it feel like your characters are not adequately developed.